I'm going to introduce Mr. Fred Sauceman. As we were talking earlier, this is his 14th appearance. I have not double-checked Ronnie's spreadsheet to make sure that that's true, but I'm going to take his word. Fred is a native of Greenville, Tennessee. He currently serves as a senior writer at ETSU, where he's also an announcer and producer at the public radio station WETS-FM. In addition to reporting regional news every morning at the WETS, he is the host of a weekly program called Vital Voices. Fred has written and edited 7 food-related books, and the most recent being The Prophets of Ridgewood, an Appalachian family's life and barbecue. He has produced 8 documentary films, ranging from Red Hot Dogs to Dr. Enough. He has his wife Jill write the flavors column for each issue of the Blue Ridge Country magazine, which is published out of Roanoke, Virginia. Fred also writes a monthly column for the Tastes pages in both Kingsport Times and the Johnson City Press. He appears once a month on Food with Fred on WJHL TV. In his spare time, Fred plays both piano and fiddle and is a student at the Root Studio School in Jonesboro, Tennessee, where he studies oil painting. Interesting fun facts. If you don't mind to stand and give Mr. Fred Sauceman a warm welcome.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mike. We may be making history today. I mean, who in their right mind would talk about Chow-Chow at a Civic Club meeting? It probably hasn't been done before, so we will make this a first. I've been knee deep in Chow-Chow all summer and fall. I was asked by a guy who's putting a book together on Southern food. He happens to be teaching in Poland right now. He said, we need a section on an Appalachian product based on a recipe. And I'm thinking, what am I going to write about? And I kept coming back to Chow-Chow because of what it represents. Chow-Chow is not strictly an Appalachian food by any stretch of the imagination. It's made all over the country. But I think we can easily make the case that the Chow-Chow epicenter of the universe is Scott County, Virginia. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. If you go into any basement in Scott County where there's a garden on the property and you look on the shelves in that basement, you will of course find all kinds of canned goods and most likely Chow-Chow. And this happens to have come from the larder of a lady named Kay Wade. I'll talk about her in a minute. What is Chow-Chow? And it's okay if there's somebody in this room who doesn't know what Chow-Chow is. The best way to define it, to me, comes from a recipe that was included in a 1998 cookbook published by the First Baptist Church of Gate City, Virginia. A lady with the wonderful name of Willie Ray Gardner calls her recipe End of the Garden Relish. And that's exactly what Chow-Chow is. When those vegetables start to turn, they aren't shaped as nicely as they were in July and early August, then what do? We don't trash them. We turn them into something that will preserve the bounty of that garden through the winter. And that relish is called Chow-Chow. That picture is a little bit misleading because those are very nice vegetables. But we make Chow-Chow out of anything in the garden, no matter how it looks. We just cut the bad places out and don't waste a thing. I'm going to talk about 2 Chow-Chow champions from Scott County, Virginia. The first is Jeanette Carter. You're familiar with her family. Her parents were A.P. and Sarah Carter. There you see her sister Gladys and her brother Joe. Joe died in 2005. Jeanette died in 2006. I have used this photograph of Jeanette Carter making Chow-Chow probably as much as any picture in my Foodways work, both in presentations and in publications. This is Jeanette in her home in Hiltons, Virginia, or near Hiltons, in 2002, making Chow-Chow. And what struck me about Jeanette Carter and her Chow-Chow is the fact that no matter how much media attention the family was getting worldwide, Jeanette made time every fall to get together with her brother Joe and make Chow-Chow. Joe hand forged a special chopper. I wish I had a picture of it. It was made out of iron. It was S-shaped. And they had a very clear division of labor. It was Joe's job to chop and Jeanette's job to mix and stir. And the chopping with Chow-Chow is very important. Most Chow-Chow cooks will tell you Chow-Chow vegetables need to be hand chopped. I found a recipe from Food Network Hotshot Chef the other day using a food processor. If you use a food processor in making Chow-Chow, not only will you violate tradition, you will end up with watery, runny, nasty Chow-Chow. So the hand chopping is the key. You'll notice there are lots of things on that table. There is turmeric, or as Jeanette said, turmeric. There is cinnamon, there is ginger, all kinds of things. And there's the recipe. The tape is brittle and yellowing, taped into this old family cookbook. Jeanette's recipe had 12 different things in it. And so I sat down with her in 2003 and talked to her about how she made it and how her mother, this was Sarah Carter's Chow-Chow, A.P. Carter's wife, her Chow-Chow recipe. And it's a real treasure to me. Jeanette, by the way, cooked. She worked in the kitchen at Hilton's Elementary School. And she continued to do that, even though the Carter family was world famous. She continued to work in that kitchen where my wife, Jill, went to school. Jeanette's daughter, Rita Forrester, gave me access to the logbooks from that kitchen. And I went through them, took pictures of just about every page. And this is a list of what the children at Hilton's Elementary School ate in the spring of 1954. Within an 11-day period in 1954, May of 54, soup beans were served at Hilton's Elementary School 6 times. That's how important soup beans are to our culture. And that's the primary use of this relish called Chow-Chow, to top the bowl of soup beans. It's not a talk about soup beans, but remember the significance of soup beans in our culture. Soup beans, that bowl represents a coming together of what was here and what was brought here. The what was here are the beans. The what was brought here is the pork. Typically, soup beans are seasoned very simply. Beans, water, salt, and some version of pork, oftentimes smoked pork. So you have Native American pinto beans meeting European pigs. Pigs were brought into this country by the Spanish in the 16th century to the lower south, and by the English in the 17th century to the upper south. So when those two things come together, we have this wonderful concoction called soup beans, served always with a side of cornbread, which is another representation of what was here in the hands of the Native American populations. Sometimes that cornbread, by the way, gets combined with the pork, and we have crackling cornbread. So, the other Chow-Chow champion came from that very same school. And I had a hard time finding a picture of Clara Sloan. Clara Sloan and Jeanette Carter ought to be in the Chow-Chow Hall of Fame. And we'll just create one today and put them in it. Clara Sloan was a second grade teacher. She taught in Virginia for 42 years. She taught at Hilton's for 22 of those 42 years. She was Jill's second grade teacher. She's known still today by her students for her compassion, her kindness, the way she went above and beyond to take care of the needs of her students, including the hunger experienced by her students. But it is her Chow-Chow recipe that makes the rounds in Scott County, Virginia, and she didn't even call it Chow-Chow in this recipe. Mrs. Sloan's Vegetable Chop. In this little book published by Hilton's United Methodist Church, Hilton's Memorial United Methodist Church, there in Scott County, where a lot of neat things happen. Hilton's Memorial has a Lord's Acre sale every fall, the last Friday and Saturday in September. This year, working on another documentary film, I got to watch them make apple butter and learn about the precision and the labor that go into the making of apple butter. If you don't know about that, it's a nonstop stirring process with poplar stirrers. People who make the apple butter there at Hilton's will tell you you cannot let this sit unstirred for 5 seconds or it'll burn on you. So it's labor. It's labor for a good cause in that case. Labor to pay off the debt for the fellowship or education building at that church and to help people in the community. They use Mrs. Sloan's Chow-Chow recipe at that church. Making of Chow-Chow at home really was boosted by the home demonstration movement. And when I worked in radio, we had segments every week featuring the local county extension agent, featuring the local home demonstration agent. And I admire people who devote their lives to that kind of work. Going to college, getting a sophisticated education, taking that knowledge into rural districts and teaching people how to can, for example, teaching people how to keep house, teaching people how to make bread, a whole lot of things. When this movement gets underway in the early part of the 20th century, suddenly have a whole lot more people making Chow-Chow in those home kitchens because they're doing so with the knowledge transmitted by the home demonstration agent. Not only knowledge, but tips on how to do this right and how to do it safely. This happens to be a picture of a canning contest taken in 1912 at the Tennessee State Fair in Nashville. This lady has been making Mrs. Sloan's Chow-Chow since 1952, every year since 1952. Her name is Kay Wade, and if you're from Scott County, you know her as Diddle. But she makes it every year, and she's making it in this case with a friend named Mark Music, who grew up in Scott County and comes back from Atlanta, Georgia every summer to make this Chow-Chow. He retired as director of the Southern Regional Education Board. He was one of Mrs. Clara Sloan's students at Hilton's Elementary School, and there they are making the Chow-Chow. That's the Hilton's Chow-Chow made with Mrs. Sloan's recipe. If Scott County, Virginia is the epicenter of Chow-Chow making, then there are certainly shock waves in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. And one of the places where I enjoy ordering Chow-Chow is right here in Kingsport. You've heard me talk about Betty Jones, Betty's Stockyard Cafe. I don't think Betty would care that I'm telling you today she's 82 years old. Gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning, comes in and makes 3 gallons of soup beans every day and serves those soup beans with Chow-Chow. When I first talked to Betty about soup beans and Chow-Chow, she was using Chow-Chow from Clouds Bend United Methodist Church. There are all kinds of approaches to Chow-Chow. Jeanette Carter's is a very Baroque Chow-Chow. There's a lot in it. What Betty was serving from Clouds Bend is the most minimalist Chow-Chow I have ever seen. Vinegar, cabbage, salt, and sugar, and that's it. So what goes into that pot can vary. And I'm going to try to answer the question, why? Note, by the way, Betty Jones' approach to cornbread, which is my absolute favorite way of eating cornbread. Fried on a griddle. I like greasy cornbread. Betty, by the way, although operating in Northeast Tennessee, has Southwest Virginia roots. She grew up in Dryden, Virginia. Her mother and father had 15 children naturally and adopted one more. And that's how Betty Jones learned to cook, by feeding those brothers and sisters. If you go to the Western North Carolina Farmers Market in Asheville, you will see Chow-Chow everywhere. We counted about 12 different varieties of Chow-Chow made in Northeast Tennessee and Western North Carolina. And next door at the Moose Cafe, you can find soup beans and Chow-Chow as a side dish. So this stuff is not going away. Go to the Dairy Ace in Irwin, Tennessee. You can get a bowl of beans and a cup full of Chow-Chow, and they've been doing that since 1950. All right, where did this come from? Where did the name come from? The second question, I'm still not sure about. As much reading as I've done on Chow-Chow, I can't tell you with certainty where that name came from. And that 3,000 word piece I wrote on Chow-Chow, I'm sure is the longest piece on Chow-Chow that has ever been authored. This is my friend John Edgerton. One of the great joys of our lives was to get to know John. After he published his magnum opus, Southern Food, at Home, on the Road, in History, in 1987. A few years later, he became one of our very closest friends. And people still use that book as an authoritative volume when they want to know something about the cooking of our region. Even John Edgerton, as knowledgeable as he wasn't sure about the origin of the name. He quotes the Dictionary of American Food and Drink in saying that the words Chow-Chow may come from a Chinese word cha, meaning mixed, into America through Chinese immigrants that worked in California as early as the 1840s. I'm not sure about that. I don't think John was sure about that. Wikipedia even says they're not sure about that. After acknowledging in Wikipedia that the ways to write Chow-Chow, that is one word, two words, or hyphenated, the author of that Wikipedia piece says the origins of Chow-Chow are unclear. So I don't know. We refer to food as chow. Maybe that's the origin. Another theory is the word Chow-Chow are related to the French word choux, meaning cabbage. That makes a whole lot more sense. But I've also heard it said that the word came through the Acadians. Remember the story of the Acadians? They were thrown out of Canada and ended up in South Louisiana as Cajuns. Why were they thrown out of Canada? Because they refused to swear allegiance to the crown, the British monarchy. And they wanted to continue to worship God as Catholics. That's why they ended up in South Louisiana. And I have found Chow-Chow in South Louisiana. As you might expect, it does have a good bit of red pepper in it. I don't think Chow-Chow got into America through the Acadians, which became the Cajuns, but maybe that's the origin of the word. Here's where I think it came from. And this is why food history is so fascinating to me, because it shows these connections that will surprise you. I think, and there are other people who think this too, that Chow-Chow came from Indonesia. And if you look back at Jeanette Carter's Chow-Chow recipe, that starts to make sense in terms of the spices that are in it. When you write food history, one of the first things you look at is colonization. Who owned whom? Sad, unfortunate, but it's a reality. Who owned Indonesia for 300 years? The Dutch. If you look at that map closely, that's a map of Indonesia, and the oceans, bodies of water in the places are written in Dutch. One scholar, John Martin Taylor, known as Hoppin' John from the low country of South Carolina, theorizes that spicy relish traveled out of South Asia, Indonesia, across the waters, around the Horn of Africa, as a part of the spice and slave trade. And it ends up in West Africa and gets into the low country of South Carolina on slave and spice ships. All right, makes good sense. I also think, this is my own theory, that spicy relish in the hands of the Dutch makes it into Central Europe, the Netherlands, Germany. And like a lot of our food in this region, our sauerkraut, our dumplings, it travels from Central Europe across the Atlantic into Pennsylvania and down into these mountains. So I think what you really have is sort of a Chow-Chow pincer movement, coming from the low country west and north, and from Pennsylvania south. And those lines converge in the mountains of Southwest Virginia and East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. This was, in terms of published cookbooks, this was not the earliest American cookbook. It was written in 1770, but it wasn't published until 1984. The first real American cookbook wasn't published until 1796. That's pretty late in our history, by a lady named Amelia Simmons in New England. If Harriet Pinckney Horry would have published hers when she wrote it, it would have been, and if she did it in the United States, what would become the United States, it would be our first published cookbook on this continent. But it wasn't published until 1984. If you've been to Myrtle Beach, you've been in Horry County. Pinckney and Horry two names of very aristocratic families in South Carolina. And in this book, there is a recipe for pucholila. I'm assuming that's the way she would have said it. And from that word, we get piccalilli. Just a footnote about books of that era. Many of them were written by aristocratic people for use by domestic help. They assume a knowledge of cooking that slave already had. And they were largely in the 1700s based on English recipes. We didn't really have a true American cookbook in this country until 1824. That's very late in our history. And that's Mary Randolph's The Virginia Housewife. She was a cousin of Thomas Jefferson. And in that book, she begins to acknowledge native products like beans and corn. All right, this word pucholila transmogrifies into piccalilli. And we start seeing the word piccalilli about 1790, and it's still in use today. This is an English product. Okay? Who owned India for about 100 years? The British. So the spicing you see in this British relish, like cayenne pepper and ginger and turmeric, is very typical of South Asia. The Heinz Company still produces an India relish, which is very much like our mountain Chow-Chow. By the way, in researching Chow-Chow, Mr. Heinz had a couple of ventures that didn't work until he started H.J. Heinz Company that makes the ketchup now. And in one of those companies, he's selling a relish that had horseradish in it. And I found some old recipes from the late 19th century that sort of incorporated that ingredient, which we don't see in Chow-Chow now. Let's go back to Jeanette's recipe. Jeanette's recipe had 12 ingredients in it. It is almost identical, particularly in its spicing, to an Indonesian pickle called acar. Almost identical. It's almost identical to Harriet Pinckney Horry's 1770 recipe for pucholili. So here's what's happening in South Carolina, and then 200 years later and many miles away, it's happening in Southwest Virginia. I mentioned that Chow-Chow varies. Generally, the farther north you go, if you go back to Pennsylvania, the more stuff gets incorporated into that Chow-Chow. Like lima beans, yellow beans, corn, cauliflower. So a jar of Pennsylvania Chow-Chow looks sort of like succotash. And this place has been making it since 1946. Now, last slide. Where did the word relish come from? We know that one. We can pin that down. Interestingly, it comes from a French word meaning a remainder, something left behind. And I'm going to read you how I concluded that 3,000 word Chow-Chow piece. And I'll wrap up. Does Chow-Chow matter? Yes, it matters. The cooks of Southwest Virginia, East Tennessee, and Western North Carolina, through creativity engendered by a history of hard times, have turned a seemingly secondary dish into something grand. Chow-Chow is a symbol of Appalachian frugality and resourcefulness, an edible testament to the natural wisdom and veneration for the land that continue to define this region. That's what Chow-Chow means to me. It's not just a little bit of spice and a little bit of sour to add to those beans. It means tradition. It means respect for what you've grown, the labor you've put into that garden, and not losing it, and being able to enjoy it when it's very cold outside in February. Now, does anybody have any questions?